Hi guys. So in this video, I will be explaining you this versus that based question. So there are like n number of topics within core Java or Spring Boot or microservice in which it can ask you like what's the difference between this and that? Like what's the difference between Spring and Spring Boot? What's the difference between one of the monolithic application and microservice based application? So these type of questions are most commonly asked. So let's get started and understand it. Okay. So comment it down below like if I miss any one of them. Like there can be n number of different space questions that can be asked, so I've tried to cover like most of the thing, and if I have missed something you can just comment it down below. I will create a video like part 2 of it as well. Okay, so without any delay, let's get started. Yeah, so let's understand this versus that based questions. Okay, so first comes core Java. In core Java, what kind of difference based questions can be asked? So let's understand. So this versus that in core Java. So first question is equal to versus dot equals. Okay, so this is a very important question, especially for freshers or those who are coming out as an intern. So this is coming to be as a very important question. Okay, the first equal to, it basically compares the actual address reference. It doesn't compare the content of it basically, and equals method compares the actual content of the object. This is the main difference between the two, and there can be like more differences as well, but this difference is the most important difference. Okay, then it is equal to is basically used for primitives. It is not used for non-primitives type data. Okay, but equals generally used for comparing the values of the particular objects. Equal to can check if two reference points to the same objects in the memory. Okay, there are two references pointing to the same object in the memory. That means those two objects are equal. Okay, and equals method, it checks like if two objects have the same value. It doesn't check whether it points to the same memory or not. Okay, it may or may not point to the same memory, but the content should be same for equals method to return me true. Okay, then equal to for objects, it returns false if reference not point to same object. Okay, that I already discussed with you. And it can return true if references are different but the content is same. Here content is very important. Okay, for equals method, that needs to be kept in mind. Then equal to doesn't override any method, but equals method is typically overridden in classes like string and integer. Okay, so in that there is an inbuilt method being written. Equals method is being written. So have you heard about this term like overriding hash code and equals method? So what is happening there? We are overriding hash code and equals method so that it follows certain pattern. Okay, so if there are more number of objects which are having the same hash code, then it should point to the same bucket in the hash map, right? So those kind of logic we have to implement by overriding hash code as well as equals method. So if we are overriding hash code, then we have to make sure that we are overriding equals method as well, which is actually checking the content of the objects. So let's suppose I'm checking for employee. So employee may have ID, name, age, salary, location. There can be n number of things. So it's a flexibility for us to identify like based upon our requirement which all field components needs to be compared with. Like equals method should be checked in which of the components of employee class. So if we are selecting only ID, name, age, then only ID, name, age will be considered. Salary will not be considered for comparing the equality check. So that logic, it's totally depends upon us, and it depends upon our requirements, project requirements. Based upon that, we provide that. Okay, so this is the basic difference between equal to and dot equals method. So now let's get started with the next set of difference. Okay, next is between string and string builder. This is very important and very recursively asked questions in interviews. Okay, so I've seen like almost 90-95% of the interviewers will ask this to especially freshers. Even to experienced candidates, this type of questions are asked. So this comes out to be the very important type of questions for interview. So string is what? String is immutable, string builder is mutable. This is the first and foremost difference between string and string builder. So what does that mean? So immutable means you can modify the existing string, but if you try to modify it, will create a new object out of it. Okay. So let's suppose I'm doing string s equal to new string, some values I'm taking, okay, like hello or hi Java, like that kind of thing. But if I'm trying to modify the existing object reference, it doesn't modify the existing value of it. Rather, it will create a new object altogether if you are trying to modify. Okay, let's suppose I'm doing concat or some other kind of operations are doing on that existing string reference. So it will not modify the existing string object reference. Rather, it will create a new object altogether. That is the concept of immutability. Okay, so it increases the security basically. Okay, and it is very much synchronized. So that is the important concept. It is thread safe. Okay. But in case of string builder, it is mutable. So there is one method called append method, which is there within string builder. So that method is not there in string class. Okay. So with the help of append method in string builder, what does that happen is basically when we are trying to append some data within that string builder object reference, so it will actually append the existing value, whatever the value you are trying to add, it will append to the existing data which was already being added before. So that it will not create a new object, it will append to the same object. Okay. So that it's recommended that we make use of string builder if you are running a loop. Okay. So within loop, you should not make use of string builder, but if thread synchronization and thread safety is important because string builder is not thread safe. Okay. So we have to understand our requirements. So if the requirement is that it should be thread safe, okay, it should be immutable, so and security should be high, these all concepts are very important for you, then go ahead with string. But if thread safety is not that required and immutability feature you have to make use of, so for that sake we can make use of string builder class. So this we have to understand. Okay. So for string, it's actually very poor for concatenation within loops that I already shared, and for string builder it's efficient for frequent string concatenation within the loops. Okay. So it will not acquire much more object memories. Okay. So string is suitable for constants and which are unchanged, values which are unchanged. Okay. And string builder, it is ideal for dynamic string manipulation. So what does that mean? So whenever within the loop you are trying to modify the existing string reference, then we can change it dynamically, right? But if you are making use of string over here, it will create a new object every time within the loop. So that is very much problematic, right? So dynamically, if you want to manipulate the strings at a runtime, so that way also we can make use of string builder. Okay. And string, it takes up more memory because if you are running it within a loop, it will create n number of objects depending upon how many times the loop is running. So string takes up more memory, but here string builder is much more memory efficient for modification as it doesn't ever create any new object for each change. So each and every change will be appending to the existing object. So that concept is very much important. So this difference is very important for interviews. So go ahead and practice it, learn this difference. This is very much important not only for interview, but when you are working as a in a project. Okay, so in a project, you should always choose for string builder when you are running a loop within a particular object. Okay, so you have to identify when to go for what. I'm not telling that always you should go for string builder or always you should go for this, not go for string. So we have to understand the requirements. Based upon that, we have to take that wise decision. Okay, I hope you are getting the concept. So now let's understand the next set of difference. So array list versus linked list. This is also very important interview question. Okay, so let's understand that. Array list is based upon dynamic array. Okay, that is a resizable array. So normal array, if I consider, it is not resizable, right? So we can have like int array, float array, any kind of array we can have, primitive, non-primitive arrays. So in that, basically, we have to provide the length, like what's the size of that array within that braces, right? Normal braces, okay, square braces, we have to provide what's the length of that array. But in case of array list, we don't provide that length. We just provide the generic type. Okay, like list, we are providing employee type, a student type, al equal to new array list, like that we are providing. We are not passing any size. Why we are not passing any size? Because internally it is a dynamic array, that is resizable array. So whenever 75% of the space of the array is filled up, okay, so it's also based upon index. Okay, because array list is internally making use of array only, so here index based searching will always happen. Okay, but it is resizable. That means at runtime it will check whether the size is filled is 75% of the entire capacity, then it will automatically double its size. Okay, so this is the advantage at runtime. Okay, because in array we never know, right, when the size will expand. So at the runtime, if you are sure that this size only will be there, it is not expandable, then go ahead with array. Or else, if we are not sure, like at runtime, how much size it may expand, then go for array list. Okay, so here array versus array list question can also come. So that also you should keep in mind. Okay. And linked list is based upon doubly linked list. Okay, like from both side it can have a connection, like there is a one node. Okay, so it all happens within memory, so there is a memory references happening within linked list. Okay, it is not based upon index, so that we have to understand. So here in array list internally, like first block is there, okay, which contains some value, then second block, then third block, it should be index based, like 0 1 2 3 4. But in linked list it is not a case. Zero node can be at nth position, nth node can be at first position, but they all are connected via memory address. Like one node is pointing to another node via which memory reference? What is the memory reference connection? So that way linked list is used. Okay. So whenever there is a frequent search operation, then what we have to go for? We have to go for array list because it is faster. Okay. But when we have to do certain insert or update kind of operation, then we have to go for linked list. Because in array list, if you are trying to insert or delete something from the end, then it will start from the zeroth index and it has to go till the end. But in linked list, it's not a case. So whenever you try to delete something from the middle or from the end, so basically you can directly point to that particular reference. Okay, so each and every position should not be removed from its initial position. It's not required to be removed. Only we have to change the reference. Okay, so if let's suppose n by 2th node you want to delete it, okay, or you want to point it to some other reference, so what you can do, you can remove the reference of the n by 2th node which is being pointed by n by 2 minus 1th node. Okay, so n by 2 minus 1th node was pointing to n by 2th node. So what you can do, you can change the reference of n by 2 minus 1th node to n from n by 2 to n by 2 plus 1th node. Just you have to change the reference. And whenever you change the memory reference, so what will happen because of that? There will be no pointer pointing to the n by 2th node. So if there is no pointer pointing to n by 2th node, then what will happen? Garbage collector will come and will see like if there is any pointer pointing to n by 2th node, if there is any pointer. So no, there is no pointer pointing. So what garbage collection will do? It will just sweep up. So there are a lot of algorithms within garbage collection like mark and sweep algorithm, like different kind of algorithm basically actually checks frequently, like if there is no, if there is any objects which have been pointed to, so that particular object will be removed from the garbage collection. Okay, so that particular object will be removed from the heap if it is not being pointed to by anybody else. Okay, so that is very important concept in Java, the garbage collection part. Okay, so this is the basic difference which I have told you. So array list, if you are trying to search, okay, it provides the constant time. Okay, if you are accessing element by index, but in linked list, this access an element by index. If you are accessing element by index, if you are doing that, it will take O of n time complexity. So that's why it's preferred not to make use of index based position because it's not based upon index, it's based upon the memory references. Okay, so basically we don't go for linked list when we have to access the data. For accessing we have to go for array list, and for modifying the data like inserting or deleting something from the middle or from the end or from any position, then we have to go for linked list because it's faster than array list. For searching array list is better, and for updating or deleting linked list is better. Okay, so array list is faster for random access. If you want to access random data and iterate over it, then it's based upon indexing. So array list will be faster. And linked list is faster for insertion and deletion, that I already told you. Then array list takes up lesser memory than linked list because there is no overhead for node pointers. But in linked list, it takes extra memory overhead because there are a lot of pointers. Okay, so we just hated pointers using in C, right? But in Java, we are not making use of pointers much, but in linked list is all with respect to memory reference. So here we have to make use of pointer. Okay, so this becomes very important. If you are not understanding pointer, then understand the usage of pointers first, then only you can understand linked list. Okay, otherwise you will not be able to understand what's happening. So if you see the basic code of insertion deletion, everything comes around with pointer. There should be one head pointer pointing to the head position, then there should be some next pointer pointing to the next value of the head. Okay, then we have to iterate it still till that node dot next is not equal to null. So what is all this thing? This iteration is happening based upon not an index but the memory reference. So this we have to keep in our mind. Okay, And for array list, there is no ideal, not ideal for operations which requires frequent insertion deletion. But linked list is very much useful and frequent whenever we have to insert or delete somewhere from the middle or from the end. Okay, from the beginning it may not be required. We can directly make use of array list. Okay, why we go for linked list? It can, we can use anything, but linked list should not be used there whenever we have to insert or delete from the first. So we have to understand like where and all what type of operations we have to perform. Based upon that, we have to take that decision. Okay. Now, next step is synchronized hash map versus concurrent hash map. This also is very much important for interview perspective. Okay. So out of these three, like all, I'm not telling that they will ask, but two or three of them they may ask you about from all this versus that based questions. Okay. So first comes with respect to thread safety. So synchronization, it provides thread safety it because it synchronizes entire map. But in concurrent hash map, what is that? It provides thread safety. Both are thread safe. That we have to understand. Okay, synchronization hash map versus concurrent hash map, both are thread safe. But when we understand synchronized hash map, it actually locks the entire hash map and provides synchronization. But in case of concurrent hash map, it doesn't synchronize the entire hash map. Rather, it synchronizes a particular block of that map. Okay, so there's like 0 to 15, 16 blocks will be there. So if I want multiple threads to acquire lock on that hash map, then we have to go for concurrent hash map. Okay, because one thread will acquire the lock on one object, another thread will acquire the lock on another object. Like that, 16 threads can acquire the lock at the same time. Okay, that's the maximum possibility I'm telling you. So that's why concurrent hash map is much more effective, much more faster. Because in synchronized hash map at the same time, only one thread can acquire the lock on the hash map. But in concurrent hash map at the same time, 16 threads can acquire the lock on that hash map. So that's why concurrent hash map is much more preferable over here. Okay. With respect to locking mechanism, it locks the entire map that I already told you. But in concurrent hash map, it makes use of fine grain locking, like segment by segment locking, bucket by bucket locking will be there. Okay. Performance, it is synchronized, is lower performance, you know, right? Because one thread will acquire the lock on entire map. But in case of concurrent hash map, performance is very fast. Okay, because I already told you 16 threads can acquire lock on a particular hash map at the same instance. So automatically performance will become higher. Okay. Null key values. Synchronization allows synchronized hash map allows only one null key and it can have multiple null values. That is also very important. But in concurrent hash map, it does not allow any null key or null value. Okay, so now it's a homework to understand like why it does not allow null keys or null values, like not even one null key. And synchronized hash map allows one null key. Just try to think and understand the difference, like why this difference is there. Okay. Next is iterators. So iterators here are not thread safe because it requires external synchronization. Okay. So if you are making use of iterators, so it will not be thread safe over here. It will not make that synchronization thread safe. Okay. That's why we should not prefer iterators with synchronized hash map. But with concurrent hash map, iterators are weakly consistent. Okay. So it may be safe, it may not be safe, it depends. Okay, so it needs to be safely used during iteration by understanding the requirements. In that particular portion only, we have to make use of iterations. Okay, so that's the difference. Next comes a difference between hash map and tree map. What's the difference between the two? So there can be n number of maps, right? There is like identity hash map, weak hash map, tree hash map, synchronized hash map, concurrent hash map. They are like the enum hash map is also there. There are like 7 to 8 type of maps are present. So you should be having a basic understanding among all these maps. So I've already created one video on hash maps. You can go through that as well. Okay, so from there you will get the idea. It's already there. You can search within my content section. You will get to know. Okay, so in hash map is unordered, so because it doesn't guarantee like what's the order of keys. Okay, because hash map is not synchronized, it's not thread safe, right? For that only we are making use of either synchronized hash map or concurrent hash map. So hash map is unordered. Okay, and tree map, it is ordered. So hash map is not following a particular order, like it's like ascending order, descending order, no. But in case of tree map, this is one of the configuration, or this is one of the category of the map which follows certain order, like it is either ascending or descending. We can set it, okay, when we are defining the tree set. Okay, for hash map, it provides constant time complexity, like it is O of one time complexity. Okay, for get and put operation, that I think you should be already doing. But it depends, like if there are like n number of elements and all are being pointed to the same bucket, then it may have hash collision n number of times. So in that case, if we are trying to get the data or put the data at a particular bucket, so it will be checking, like if the values are same, it will point to the last bucket. So if it has to go to last bucket, then what will happen? It will increase the time complexity to O of n. Okay, so that problem has been solved with Java 8. So whenever after reaching the threshold, if it is reaching the threshold, after that it will get changed to red black tree basically. Okay, so previously it was linked list. Okay, so before there, what was the problem? Like it can have n number of nodes in linked list. So because of that, time complexity was increasing to O of n. So after Java 8, this problem has been solved, because after reaching the threshold, if there are n number of nodes still coming to the same bucket, so it will get converted to red black tree. So time complexity got reduced from O of n to O of log n. So that is the major advantage which came with Java 8. So this question also can be asked in interviews, like what major change came in Java 8, okay, with respect to hash map. So this was the major change came, okay. And it provides logarithmic time complexity like O of log n that I already told you for tree map. For hash map, it allows null key and null values. Okay, but tree map doesn't allow null key, but it allows null value. Okay, so that is very important. So that is again a homework for you to understand, like what will happen if we pass null keys within tree map. Just let me know in the comment box, if I'm passing null keys in tree map, then what will happen and why we are not putting that. Okay. Then hash map, it is best for faster lookups where ordering is not needed. Okay, so where if you see like order is not important, thread safetyness is not important, so always go for hash map because it is faster. You know, right? Whenever you are making a particular class thread safe, it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of performance. Performance will automatically get reduced. Effectiveness will automatically get increased, but performance will be reduced. So for you, if performance is not a matter, thread safetyness is not a matter, then go ahead with hash map. Okay, but you want good performance. Okay, so for that it may lag a bit. Okay, so the response time may get little lesser. If that is important for you, then you should not go for hash map. So you have to understand the project requirement. Based upon that only you have to proceed ahead. Okay, hashing provides quick access based upon the keys hash code. So if you understand the entire internal implementation of hash map, you will get to know like there is a hash code kind of thing which is calculated based upon the key. So that is again a different algorithm how it is being calculated. Okay, so that it makes it a quick accessibility thing because it's accessible based upon the key part. But in tree maps, internal structure is a red black tree, which allows ordered operation. So that's the difference between hash map and tree map. So now let's understand the next thing. Identity hash map versus weak hash map. This is also one of the important concept that we have to understand over here. Okay, so what is identity hash map? It uses reference equality check. It checks with equal to sign. But weak hash map, it checks for weak reference for keys. Like comparison is based on equals method, which actually checks the content, not the memory difference. Okay. But identity hash map, it checks the reference equality check. That is the one and only difference that you have to remember. So if you remember one, automatically other things will come on your mind. Okay. So next thing is it retains the key as long they are referenced. But in weak hash map, it automatically removes the key when they are no longer referenced by any other object. So garbage collector will come and remove that object from the heap if nobody is pointing. So that is making weak hash map more important. Okay, so if you want like garbage collector should come and remove that object, then you should go for weak hash map. But if let's suppose it's not that mandatory that has objects should be removed from the garbage collector, then go for identity hash map. It all depends upon our requirements. Okay, so one use case has been provided for you. Like it is useful when you need to compare objects by the memory reference, which is an identity rather than their value. Then identity hash map is important. But weak hash map is important when you are doing some caching based scenarios. Okay, where caching is important, where you want to let your keys garbage collect when it is not being used. So weak hash map is important in that scenario. And identity hash map, it allows null values, but it does not allow null keys. Okay, but weak hash map, it allows both null key as well as null value. Again, it's a homework for you. Try to put null values and try to put null keys and try to identify the pattern, like what is happening if I'm passing null key or null value in both the cases. Okay, garbage collection, it does not affect garbage collection of keys. In weak hash map, it is garbage collected. Keys can be garbage collected. Okay, not values. Keys will be garbage collected. So this is a thing that we have to understand. Now, the next set of concept that we have to understand is final versus finally versus finalized. So this is also comes out to be very important for interview. So specifically for freshers, even to 2 to 4 years of experience, this question comes. So this is very important for interview. Okay. So now let's understand the difference. So final is what? Final is particularly being written at a class level also. It can be written at a method level also. It can be written at the field level also. So each has its own importance. So there also difference can come. Like if I'm putting final at a class level, then what will happen at method level and field level? What's the difference between all these three? Okay, so if I'm putting at a class level, then no other class can no other class can extend that particular class. Okay, so it cannot be extendable. Then if I'm putting at a final at a method level, then no other class can override this particular method. Okay, because the method is final. Then if I'm putting at a field reference level, like final employee some reference equal to new employee, like that if we are making use of, okay, then what will happen? We are not being able to modify the existing object. So that's a difference when we are putting at a class level or method level, object level. That is important for interview. Okay. Then let's understand this difference. So final, I have already told you, it is used to declare constants. It prevents method overriding and it prevents inheritance as well. When you are putting at class level, it prevents inheritance. At method level, it prevents overriding. At field level, it prevents changes to the existing value. Okay. And finally, it is basically used with try catch block. So whenever you want to execute some kind of lines at any cost, like some object reference you have created and you want to close it at the end of the program execution, then you can put it in finally block. So basically, it is used with JDBC connections or any kind of connection. So it is being used so that you will have a final check whether that resources or that stream is not opened. Okay, so if it is opened, we have to close it. So that particular part you can put it in finally block. So now that particular problem has been resolved in such extent with try with resources. Okay, but still finally block is much more important and useful as well still. Okay, and finalize method is basically focused with garbage collector. So whenever you are calling system.gc method, okay, so internally it is making use of finalize method and checks like if there is any null reference pointing to that or not. So if there is any null reference, it will remove that from the heap. So for that, system.gc method needs to be called and JVM takes care of it. So we don't have to think much on that. We should not explicitly make use of system.gc method. JVM will automatically do that for us. Okay. So we can do, but it's not preferable to make use of system.gc. Okay. So final can be applied to variables, methods, and classes. Finally, it is ensures that there is a resource cleanup. Okay, like closing files, closing streams. Okay, so either we can make use of try with resources or we can make use of try catch finally or try with finally. Okay, catch can be removed. Finalize, it has been deprecated in Java 9 and it is no longer recommended for resource cleanup because you are interrupting the JVM's already default cleanup process, because in Java this garbage collection happens by default. Okay, so we should not do that garbage collection explicitly by ourselves. So that's why after Java 9 it has not been recommended to use, so it has been deprecated. Okay. Final, it is immutable values. Once assigned, a finals variable's value cannot be changed. That I already told you. Finally, it executes always, even if an exception occurs. But, okay. In some scenario, finally block will not be executed. What is that scenario? When there is system.exit method. So whenever you are trying to exit from the existing code and you want to exit it from then and there itself, from that particular line, then in that scenario it will not go to finally block. So this also asked in the interview, like in which scenario finally block will not get executed. So this question also always be kept in your mind. And finalize, it typically used to release the resources, but it is not reliable as of now. Okay. Final, it is used to define constants that can be shared across the application. So whenever if you have worked in your project, you might be knowing that you are creating some constants class, right? In constant class, you are creating final, the field values. You are keeping it as final, the constant values. Okay. And finally, it can be executed. Okay. It can be used to execute critical final operations, okay, in case of exception handling. So in that case, finally is executed. And finalize, it's not a guaranteed mechanism for resource cleanup, and I already told you. Final class should not be subclassed. It cannot be subclassed also, okay. And finally, it block is executed even if there is a return statement. So in try, if you are trying to return something, and in that scenario, finally block will also be executed. So there is a confusion in students' mind, like if I'm returning something from try block, will it go to finally block or not? Yes, it will be executed. Finally block will always be executed until and unless you are exiting from the system. Okay, with system.exit. So this is the thing. And finalize is automatically invoked by garbage collector. So we don't have to explicitly think on that. Okay. So this was a difference between finally, and finalize. So now core Java part is over. So now let's understand and go ahead with Spring and Spring Boot. So till here, if you have any doubt, do let me know. And if you think that like there can be other type of this versus that based question in core Java, then also you can do let me know on that as well. Okay. So now let's understand Spring versus Spring Boot. So this is also frequently asked questions in interviews. Okay, so what's the difference between the two? So Spring is used for building enterprise level application. Okay, it's not standalone based application. It's enterprise level application with features are there like dependency injection, AOP, and transaction management. These kind of features are there within Spring. Okay, but there are a lot of configurations we have to do with respect to Tomcat configuration. If you have to do configuration with respect to Hibernate or some dependency kind of thing, everything we have to configure it manually. So like if we have to write certain business logic to implement certain API, so in that scenario 40% of the time we have to provide towards configuring that Spring, and the runtime is also very slow because Tomcat is not embedded within Spring. Okay, so that makes Spring a little bit more tedious and time taking. So to remove that problem, Spring people has come up with Spring Boot concept, and Spring Boot has rapid application development. It has auto configuration feature, and it makes your code production ready instantly. Okay, within very less time it makes your code production ready. It is standalone based application. It has embedded Tomcat server. So that is a lot of features within Spring Boot. Okay, so it's a framework which is based on top of Spring only, and is designed to simplify the development of Spring application by providing default and auto configuration feature. Okay, so if you want, you can have default or auto configuration feature. It's totally depending upon you. Okay, and Spring requires more manual configuration for components like data source, transaction managers, and embedded servers. And Spring Boot provides automatic configuration by commonly used components like data source, embedded server, and security. Okay, it provides automatic configuration for all of them. If you want, you can create a bean and you can configure it separately, but it's not required. Okay, configuration separately is required if and only it's required by your project. Otherwise, Spring Boot will automatically take care of it. So in Spring, there is no embedded server. Spring Boot has embedded server like Tomcat or Jetty. If you want to exclude some server, you can have exclusion tag within that. If you are writing Tomcat, you can exclude Tomcat and you can make use of Jetty servers. It's totally up to you. Spring requires configuration feature like application.xml or Java configuration classes. Spring Boot simplifies the configuration and it uses application.properties or YAML class for application settings. So that makes it much more important. So what's the difference between proper application.properties and application.YAML? That is also very important. So I will be coming to that as well. And Spring, it is suitable for legacy based application when their setup is very complex, where we are fine graining towards the each and every configuration. Then we have to go for Spring, or else we can go ahead with Spring Boot. So this is a difference that we have to understand. Next comes controller versus REST controller. What's the difference between the two? So controller is used to define a standard controller in Spring MVC basically. So whenever you have to have a connect from UI till your code base, okay, so there should be a connection, right? The API gateway comes in between. After that, controller comes. Okay, so if you have to map certain data with the help of request body or with request mapping, so controller class is very important over there. So it is being put at a class level and it doesn't contain response body. So we have to explicitly write at the response body. But at the REST controller, it has response body as well as at the controller annotation. So we don't have to explicitly write response body. So this makes it much more important for implementing REST APIs. So in our project, we mainly focus upon REST controller only. Okay, so we majorly not make use of controller. So why to include one more annotation when we are already having response body with at the REST controller? Okay, so response type, if you consider, then typically it returns a view, like either it is HTML or JSP or any kind of view. If you want to return, then we have to go for controller. For REST controller, it returns data directly, like it can be JSON or it can be XML. Okay, there is no view rendering kind of thing. Okay, so we are returning the JSON or XML part. So we can configure both of them. Which one you want, you can give the output response based upon that. Okay, and usages perspective, added controller, it is primarily used for handling web pages like form submission if you have to do, or any traditional web-based application-based requirement. Instead, then we have to go for controller. It's It's specifically written, it's for traditional application configuration based. Okay. And for REST controller, it's primarily used for REST APIs development. Okay. Annotation combination, if we do, it requires adult response body that I have already told you. Adult REST controller, it automatically includes. We don't have to focus upon that. For view resolution, adult controller typically works with view resolver to render a view. Okay, so if you are making use of JSP or time leaf, you have to make use of view resolver with controller. But with REST controller, it doesn't works upon view resolution. Okay, so directly you can send the data using JSON. So that makes REST controller much more frequently usable in projects. Okay, next, understand difference between component versus service versus repository versus controller. Okay, so these are all stereotype annotations. So this is important. And other component is basically used to scan at runtime, like which all particular classes are meant to be component. Okay. So this is a major thing that I wanted to tell you about component class. And this service, repository, and controller all are the stereotype annotations. And these are all aliases of iterative component. Okay, so it is replaceable with each other. With instead of iterative service, you can write iterative component or iterative repository or iterative controller. You can write that. But Added controller, if you are replacing it with any other type, like added service or added repository or added component, then it will not work out. If you are trying to hit a particular endpoint and that particular class is not added at controller annotated, then it will not hit your particular endpoint. So that's the difference. Okay, so it can be replaced. It will not give you a compile time error, but it will not hit your particular endpoint. So that will create a problem, right? So added component is a general purpose stereotype based annotation. So it is used to manage your beans. Added service, it's specialization for added component, typically for business logic. And added repository is specialization for DAO layer access. So added repository, to a certain extent, it will work if you are replacing it with added component or added service or added controller. But if there is some transaction based logic written, like some modification, like updating, deleting, then in that scenario, it will not be able to handle the exception. Okay, so there is specific DAO based access exception can come. DAO access exception can come, or some, let's suppose, unique constraint violation kind of exception, like DAO repository kind of access exception can come. So in that scenario, it will not be able to handle if it is not under a repository. So each and every annotation has its importance. You can't say like it can be replaceable easily. Yeah, added service can be replaceable. Till now, there is no specific rule came with added service. Like if we replace it with any other type of components, it will create problem. But we should not do that. Let's keep it a good practice, because in future if some rule comes, then we have to remember that. So don't make that changes. Okay. And added controller, it is specialization. All are specialization of added component only. Okay. Like added component is used to mark any Spring Bean that does not fit a specific role. Okay. It marks for that specific bean. Added service, it denotes service layered beans. Repository, focus on persistence based operations. Controller, it is used to define controllers in a web application for HTTP request handling. Okay. Added component can be used in any non-UI application. Added service mainly used for service and enterprise application. Repository, it interacts with typically it interacts with JPA. Okay, so there can be n number of things like CRUD repository, JPA repository, paging and sorting repository, normal repository. It's like a hierarchy is present. So here also difference can come. What's the difference between CRUD repository, JPA repository, or paging and sorting repository? They can ask questions based upon that. And normally they can ask questions like difference between CRUD repository and JPA repository. So that also you should prepare. What's the difference between CRUD and JPA? So basically JPA is at a higher level in hierarchy than CRUD repository. Okay, so JPA has all the features of CRUD, but JPA has some extra features, like it enables batch related operations which are not present within CRUD operation. So that you have to go through it once. Okay. And with controller, it primarily used for model view controller, MVC kind of architecture, which is basically old, but you should know about that, right? So that's the thing. And added component, it helps Spring automatically manage the bean lifecycle. If you are writing added component over a class, then automatically Spring container will take care of it, like when to manage, how to manage the bean lifecycle. You don't have to focus upon object creation or injecting and those things. Spring container will take care of that. Okay. With added service, it is used to mark the beans that contains business logics. With added repository, it includes additional behavior, which is with respect to data persistence, and it handles exceptions as well. With controller, it handles HTTP request response and models the attributes. Okay. For added component, there is no semantics. Okay. We are not providing any kind of semantics over here beyond the Spring managed bean. But with service, it provides semantic clarity. Like this particular class is for service related operation. Added repository, it is also semantic based, like it is for database related operation. And added controller, it also defines based upon like what kind of request is coming and we have to handle that. So that is the difference between all of them. Okay, so now let's understand this also. This is also very important for interview. What's the difference between dependency injection versus IOC? So if we understand from definition perspective, it's a design pattern. Okay, dependency injection is a kind of design pattern which is used within Spring Boot, where an object's dependencies are provided by external entity like a container, Spring container. Okay, and inversion of control is a broader principle, okay, where the control of one object creation and management is transferred to container, and we are not creating object. Rather we are just giving that, we are inverting the dependency to Spring container that please create an object for me when it is required. So it can be eagerly object creation, it can be lazily object creation. It totally depends upon us. If you are writing at the lazy annotation, it will create objects lazily. Okay, so it will not eagerly create the object as soon as you run the server. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. Scope level, it is a technique for achieving inversion of control by providing dependencies to objects. Okay, rather than having them create their dependency themselves, it will create a dependencies. Okay, but in IOC it is an overarching concept. Okay, so it encompasses various design patterns, like it includes dependency injection. Okay, where the frameworks controls the object creation, it will automatically control the object creation and its entire bean life cycle and dependencies, everything will be controlled automatically by IOC concept. With respect to focus, it dependency injection focuses specifically on providing dependencies to a class or a component, but IOC it focuses on giving control over the creation and management of objects. It is basically control based, okay, and dependency injection is action based, like it is providing the dependency. Okay, with respect to example, in DI dependency injection, the Spring framework injects a service onto controller. Okay, but in IOC, the Spring container manages the entire life cycle of a beam. Okay, and their dependencies, including starting from creation, initialization, disposal, everything will be managed. Okay, so what's a bean life cycle? This also should be taken care in your mind. Okay, with respect to relationship, DI is a technique used to implement IOC. With the help of dependency injection, we are basically implementing IOC. And IOC is an overarching principle, and DI is one way to implement IOC. So DI, dependency injection, is one of the way to implement inversion of control. So how that inversion is happening from user to container, that is being taken care of by dependency injection. So dependency injection is one of the way to implement this inversion process. So these are interdependent with each other. Okay, so that way we have to understand. Instead of understanding from difference perspective, try to understand with respect to dependency perspective, so that you can have a greater clarity in your mind. Okay, so this was a difference between the two. Let's understand this also from interview perspective. This also comes out to be very important. Okay, what's the difference between constructor-based, setter-based, and field-based injection? With respect to definition, dependencies are passed through constructor, dependencies are passed by a setter, dependencies are passed by a fields. Immutability, constructor injection, it encourages the immutability because dependencies are set at object creation level. But setter injection allows changing dependencies after object creation as well. So at the last, we have to understand the requirement, then only we have to proceed. Fields can be modified directly. So it compromises the immutability, but that's why field injection is not being used. Okay, it can be modified, fields can be modified directly, so it compromises the immutability. Okay, so it will not create a new object whenever you are trying to make it whenever you are trying to do field injection. Okay, testing part, it is easier to test constructor injection as dependencies are enforced at the instantiation time. Okay, and setter dependencies can be added flexibly. Okay, with respect to field, it makes testing difficult as reflection is often needed for mocking. Okay, for mocking purpose, we have to go for reflection. Let's suppose you are writing something on in application properties or YAML file. How can you make use of it in your test class? There we have to go for reflection. Okay, and for a lot of things we have to go for reflection, that you can figure it out. For dependency requirement, all required dependencies can be enforced, and it has to be enforced. It's not an option. But in case of setter, optional dependencies can be set up. Like if you don't want to have that dependency on a particular field, if you don't want that, then you can go for setter. If you mandatorily want all the fields should be mandatorily have a dependency, then you should go for constructor injection. Okay, and field injection dependencies aren't enforced. Okay, so which may lead to incomplete or null dependency. So there is no dependency kind of thing in field. Okay, so that we have to understand. For readability perspective, it's clear in constructor that which dependencies are needed. It promotes the readability basically. Yeah? With respect to setter, it is slightly less readable. Okay, because dependencies are very much scattered across your projects, like where and all dependencies are there, you have to search it out. Okay, with respect to field, it's less readable because dependencies are not explicitly declared at a class API level. So that was a difference. So you can pause this video here, you can understand the difference, then you can go ahead with it. Okay, so here, this is also very important, request mapping versus get mapping versus post mapping. So I can give you a brief overview. In request mapping, it can take get, post, put, patch, delete, update, anything. But get mapping, it is specifically for getting the data. Post mapping is specifically for handling the DB operation, like saving, update, or creating new resource. In that scenario, post mapping is important. So there's like a different kind of syntax is there. Okay, at the request mapping is less concise because we are not providing what type of mapping it is, and request mapping can have multiple HTTP methods. Get mapping is only for get, post mapping is only for post, and we can have different use cases. You can go through that. Okay, so this was a difference that can come in the interview. Next is put versus patch. So normally put is it is used to update a resource by replacing it completely. It will completely replace your entire row record. Okay, but in patch, if you want to update the resource partially, what do I mean by that? Means let's suppose few columns you want to update, few you don't want to update. So in that scenario, patch is very much important. With respect to request body, it requires the full representation of the resource, even if only one part is updated. But in here, requires only the fields that needs to be updated. Okay. Operation type, it's idempotent. Okay. Put is idempotent because multiple identical put requests have the same effect. So let's suppose you are trying to get the data. Okay, so whenever you are trying to get the resource again and again, again and again, it will give you the same response. That is get is also idempotent, and put is also idempotent. So first time it will do the put operation. After that, if you're trying to update a particular resource, it will give the same response. So that means it is also idempotent. And patch, it is also generally idempotent, but can vary depending upon the implementation, like which column you want to update. If you are trying to update the same column again and again, then it is also idempotent. But if you are changing the column, then it is not idempotent. So it totally depends. Use case, it is suitable for replacing or fully updating an existing resource. Okay, but it's suitable for making partial update that I already mentioned. An example is, I already told you in user profile, when you are trying to modify the existing record completely, then you can go ahead with put. Or if you want to modify some columns like one or two or more, then you can go ahead with patch. Now, what's the difference between bean and configuration? This is also very important. So whatever things I am discussing over here, whatever things, these all are very much important from interview perspective. Okay, so bean is defined individually. Okay, so you can also configure and you can let Spring Container also configure that. So if you are letting Spring Container configure that, then there is no problem at all. But if you want to configure that, then you have to define it at the method level, and that class should have address configuration. Okay, so configuration is at the class level and bean is at the method level. That's the first difference that you got it right. So bean is used to define individual beans within that configuration class. That is important. Bean is used within any class that is marked as configuration. So that class should be marked as configuration where you are making use of @bean annotation. Okay, because it is basically for configuration related thing only. And configuration primarily used on class that contains bean definition. So vice versa kind of thing is there. Okay. Bean provides a flexibility to define and configure bean in a programmatic way. And configuration indicates that a class is a configuration class and it holds the Spring Bean. Bean is typically used to define specific bean for service layers, and configuration provides a central place to define all your applications bean configuration. Okay, you can put all kind of application configuration within that configuration class. Bean is used in combination with configuration define beans, and configuration automatically includes bean. Okay, so it's a kind of vice versa thing that you can imagine. Okay, so once you make use of in your project, you will get the idea of it. Okay, so how it is being used. So that's a difference over here. Then there is one more important difference. What's the difference between singleton and prototype? Okay, singleton is creating for one bean, and prototype it helps in creating for every request. If you want to create one bean, then you can go ahead with prototype. Singleton is by default in Spring. It is by default singleton. So now here the difference may come, like what's the difference between singleton of Java and singleton of Spring Boot? So that also difference can be asked in interview. You can see for that as well. Okay, so there is a difference between singleton in Java and singleton in Spring Boot, so you can research on that. Okay, so the default scope in Spring is singleton by nature, And when you want to implement prototype, you have to specifically write at the top, like at the scope, and we have to pass the prototype. So that is very important. Okay. So it can be used when new object is being required at every request. Beans are shared across all the components in application, whether each application is very much important. Each component is being put up, then beans are shared across all the components. With prototype, each request of the bean will require a new independent instance. Scope, if it is singleton, it is ideal for stateless beans, which can be reused again and again. So singleton will be used. And prototype, it is best for rest stateful beans that cannot be shared across all the different parts of application. So it totally depends upon requirement, like what type of requirements you are having. Based upon that, you have to go ahead and implement it. So singleton scope is used for services and repositories that are not dependent on sessions or user state. So whenever it is not dependent on any session kind of thing, then go ahead with singleton. But prototype is useful for scenarios when you need some temporary or unique instances, like for processing each and every individual request, you need certain temporary or unique instance, then you have to go ahead with prototype kind of scope. Okay. Then Spring Boot added Spring Boot application added enable auto configuration. Just you can go ahead with it. It's not that difficult. So enable auto configuration means it automatically configures the dependencies of the Spring Boot. Okay, and Spring Boot application contains enable auto configuration basically. Added Spring Boot application contains three annotation: added configuration, added enable auto configuration, component scan. This is a major difference. Rest you can go ahead with. It is very much simple. You can easily understand that. You can pause the video and you can go through the difference. Okay. So this is also not that important for interview, but questions can come. So added value and added configuration properties. So added value, it is used to inject a simple value such as string, number, or expression. Basically from properties file you can use it. Added configuration properties basically used to bind a whole group of related properties from the external configuration like properties or YAML file. Added value, inject value as primitive string. But in configuration properties, it binds a collection of related properties into a Java POJO object. Okay, with this annotation. Okay, it binds basically Java POJO object with the related properties. Added value, it works for single values or single properties, but configuration properties, it works best for complex configuration that contains a lot of annotations within it. Like it can have database kind of annotations, it can have a different set of configurations within the properties file that you can have it in properties. So added configuration properties, and within that you can have a number of configurations, but added value will provide only one single configuration at a time. Okay, it cannot handle multiple properties, so that's a difference. So now it's very important. It can be used in any Spring managed bean, and configuration property may be used on Java class annotated with configuration properties as well to map the properties. Okay. So now rest of the things you can go ahead. It's like very simple to understand. Okay. So this is also very important for from interview perspective, difference between properties and YAML file. So its application of properties is a simple key value pair format, but application of YAML is more structured format using indentation for hierarchy. So there is an indentation process in YAML, right? So that way we have to understand. So YAML is specifically indented. So it's not a key value pair kind of thing like X equal to Y or X colon Y. It's not like that. There is a specific indentation we have to follow in YAML file. Properties, it is preferred for simple configurations. If the configuration you want to keep it very simple, but YAML it provides help for complex type of configuration. Let's suppose you don't want to make use of string. Properties file will have only string. It will not able to handle objects or map kind of thing. But in YAML, it may contain objects or map or list or any kind of thing you can have in YAML. So that if you want to make use of it more complex way configurations, then you have to go for YAML. Okay. Properties, it uses equal to or colon to separate key values. Application.yaml uses YAML syntax. Okay. Application.properties is line oriented, like one key value pair in one single line, and YAML supports more complex configurations. Okay. It is less human readable properties file. YAML file is more readable for larger hierarchical data. YAML, we will just keep on understanding like the hierarchy, and you can get to know like what's the property coming next. So that's a difference. So let's understand RESTful web service versus SOAP-based web service. So this is very important for interview perspective. So RESTful web service, it supports protocol like HTTP, HTTPS. Okay, as we all know that. And for perspective for SOAP, it is protocol independent. Okay, so it is commonly taking HTTP, but it is not particularly focused only upon HTTP or HTTPS. It can take SFTP type, SFTP type, TCP type, any type of data it can take, any type of protocol it can take. Okay, so that is the major difference. That's a protocol based difference. Second difference is message format based difference. That means the RESTful web services can take data in the form of JSON, XML, YAML, or plain text format, and the same thing it can give as a response data as well. Okay, but with respect to SOAP, it is strictly based upon XML. It can't take it can't take JSON type, it can't take any other type data. It will only take XML. SOAP means XML. That you have to keep in your mind. Okay. Next point is based upon complexity. So, like RESTful is basically lightweight and simple. Okay. So we don't have to do much more configuration in this, and for quick communication, for quick one API to another API communication, these RESTful web services are much more simpler to use. Okay. And for SOAP, it is more complex, and there are a lot of standards and protocols that we have to follow before analyzing and doing communication between one service and another service. So SOAP needs to be understood, like how the communication is happening. So it's a little bit complex than RESTful web services. Okay. With respect to complexity, I've already explained that. With respect to operation, as there are HTTP methods like get, post, put, post, delete, options. There are a lot of type of HTTP methods are available with respect to RESTful. With respect to SOAP, it uses only XML based request response structure. Okay. So it relies on WSDL. Okay. So there is a WSDL extension, .WSDL extension is there within the URL. So that type of URL only it will accept. And with that, it will send the request and we will get the response based upon that WSDL URL that we are sending. So it will only accept that XML based WSDL. It will not allow any other type of extension. So that is the basical limitation for SOAP. So that's why we generally not prefer using SOAP in our projects. So whenever you are working on a particular project in a banking domain project specifically, people will be mostly focusing upon RESTful web services. They will not focus much upon SOAP based web services. Okay. Then statefulness, so it is basically stateless by design. So what does that mean? So whenever you are sending a request from Postman or from UI, so it is independent than the past requests. Okay, so once you have sent a request by clicking on send, so that will contain a data, whatever header and whatever payload data, whatever URL is there, it will hold that data. And once the response you are getting it back, it will not hold the data what was sent. So again, you are sending, again, new set of data will be sent. Okay. So there is a chance that there is the same data you are sending, but it will not hold the previous data. So there is no cache kind of thing present with respect to statelessness. Okay. So with respect to state, it doesn't maintain the state. Okay. So that is very important. For SOAP, it can be stateless, it can be stateful, depending upon like what kind of service you are making use of. Okay. With respect to performance, RESTful is very much faster and more efficient because the payloads are not that big. Okay. So there is not much overload. With respect to SOAP, it is very much slower. Okay, you can understand that because payloads are very, very big. So it basically accepts XML type of data. So XMLs can be very big. So tags will be there. Within one tag there can be n number of lines. So it will be much more overloaded with lot of data. Okay, so that's why performance will be lesser or slower as compared to RESTful web services. Okay. And with respect to error handling, RESTful typically relies on HTTP status codes like 404, 500 for showing the error. But with respect to SOAP, there is detailed error handling. So it will give you like what all messages, what all error messages you are facing with respect to some request not getting the particular response which you are expecting. So there will be some error will be coming based upon that request which you are sending. So there will be detailed error message. So there will be not any particular code with respect to SOAP. Okay. So in case of security, for RESTful, it uses HTTPS, it uses OAuth, or it uses JWT for security. So there are various level of security layers that you can attach it and you can configure it. Okay. But with respect to SOAP, it has built-in web service security. Okay. As per the standard which has been maintained for enterprise grade security. So we are not providing any other kind of security, external kind of security within it. So SOAP has its own inbuilt security been defined within it. Okay. So that makes SOAP different from RESTful. So I hope you got the difference between RESTful and SOAP-based web services because this is asked in the interview. So from that perspective, I'm telling you, just go through it. At least 4 or 5 points you should be there in your mind. So keep on revising these concepts. It will be very much helpful for your interview perspective. Okay. So let's get into next stage. Yeah. So next, let's understand CRUD versus JPA versus paging and sorting repository. How many of you are aware of these terms? These are basically the hierarchy that we have discussed in previous terms, right? So there we have discussed like how there is first comes the normal CRUD repository, then comes the JPA paging and sorting repository, then comes the JPA repository, and then comes the main repository. So this is the hierarchy that we have to understand over here. Okay, so let's understand the difference between all CRUD repository versus JPA repository versus paging and sorting repository. So this is very much important. They can very easily ask, what's the difference between CRUD and JPA? What's the difference between JPA and paging and sorting? So all these three should be very much clear. At least 4 to 5 points should be there in your mind. So first and an important point is CRUD. CRUD, from the name itself, we will get to know like CRUD means basic create, read, update, delete, nothing else. Only these four basic operations will be there. In JPA, it extends paging and sorting repository. Okay, so whatever information paging and sorting is having, whatever methods paging and sorting is having, all will be there within JPA. But so JPA is extending both CRUD as well as paging and sorting. Both of these repositories methods will be there within JPA repository. And apart from that, there is certain JPA specific methods like let's suppose batch related operations you are doing, like batch delete or batch update. Those kind of methods are present within JPA repository, which is not there in CRUD and paging and sorting. Okay, so paging and sorting is an extension of CRUD repository, but additional paging sorting capabilities are present. Okay, which is not present in CRUD repository. So first comes CRUD, then comes paging and sorting, then comes JPA repository. So this is the hierarchy that we have to follow. Okay, so then with respect to inheritance concept, so CRUD repository extends the repository layer. Okay, paging and sorting repository extends CRUD repository. Okay, then JPA repository extends paging and sorting, which in turn extends the CRUD repository. So this is the hierarchy that we have to follow over here. Okay, so CRUD operations, like with respect to CRUD repository, it provides only basic CRUD methods like save, find by ID, find all, delete, delete by ID. These kind of things will be there. For JPA repository, it inherits CRUD methods from the CRUD repository. So whatever CRUD operations are there, it will automatically be inherited from the CRUD repository. There is no other type of functionalities will be added. Okay. For paging and sorting, it automatically inherits because it's extending. Okay. So with respect to additional JPA features, CRUD repository don't have any additional JPA features because JPA features are not available only. CRUD is a different repository, JPA repository is different, okay? And JPA repository, it includes JPA specific feature like batch processing, flushing of data, custom queries. Those all things can be handled within JPA repository. With paging and sorting, it lacks advanced JPA features and it only provides CRUD and paging and sorting feature because paging JPA is at top, then below that paging and sorting is coming. That means paging and sorting repository don't have the information with respect to JPA specific methods. Okay, that's why paging and sorting is only being used in those scenarios where you have to follow that in one page only specific set of records should be there. Like in one page only 10 records should be there. So that needs to be set in the UI, like how many pages are there and how many records you want in one particular page, that you can send the data from the UI, and based upon that, if you implement paging and sorting repository, it will automatically adjust. Like let's suppose 100 records are coming from database, so 10 records will be there in one page, then again 10 records will be there in another page. Like that it will be setting up the records. So like that the entire flow will happen. I hope you are getting the concept. With paging and sorting, so CRUD repository lacks that feature, it's not there. With JPA repository inherits paging and sorting, so automatically paging and sorting features will be present in JPA. Okay, and paging and sorting, it provides paging and sorting methods like find all. It accepts pageable type data and find all. You can sort it basically like how you want the data in that page, like in ascending order or descending order based upon certain column. That also you can do. Okay, so if you want detailed explanation with code for paging and sorting, how to implement that, you can comment it down below. I will create a specific video based upon paging and sorting based coding questions. Okay, so what type of projects can occur, what type of scenarios where we can use paging and sorting, those I can discuss over there. Next is with respect to use case. So CRUD repository is suitable for simple basic CRUD operations. CRUD repository will work upon. Okay, it will not handle batch related stuff. Okay, for paging and sorting, it is suitable for application that have basic CRUD along with paging and sorting features. And JPA repository is suitable for complex operations which actually needs JPA features. So this is very important difference between CRUD, JPA, and paging and sorting. I hope you got the clarity on this. So let's go get on to the next set of topic. So now let's understand about microservice. So there are various kind of question that occurs. So we have discussed with respect to core Java, with respect to Spring Boot. So now we'll be discussing with respect to microservices. Okay. So it will not ask much in microservice. Only few questions are very much important and they can ask. Okay. So let's discuss on those perspectives. So first and foremost thing is monolithic versus microservice based architecture. What's the difference between the two? So if we can understand closely, when we can go for monolithic application. So any application where there is not much functionality, only one or two types of functionalities are there that you can implement in your project. In that scenario, we can go for monolithic based application. And microservice based application, where when we can go for it, where there is large set of applications, large set of functionalities that you have to implement in your project. In that scenario, monolithic will become very much tedious. It is very much complex. It will become to debug the issue. If there is any issue coming at later stage of time, it becomes very much difficult to handle. So in that scenario, microservice will be helpful there. Okay. So monolithic is, it's easier to develop basically, and it's harder to scale, because let's suppose in future many more applications, many more features you are adding into it, so it will create problem, it will create havoc. Okay. So before understanding like when to go for monolithic, when to go for microservice, have a clear picture like where this application will stand 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, then only choose monolithic or microservice. Okay. So that it becomes very much crucial. If now you are choosing monolithic and after 5 years you are adding many more functionalities, then it will not work out. So those things you have to keep in your mind. So microservice is much more flexible, much more scalable. It's very complex to develop and manage, but still it is important when you have multiple functionalities to manage. Okay. So monolithic is having single code base. So all the components present within the monolithic application is very tightly coupled with each other. But with microservice, it's not the case. Each and every microservice has its own code base. So let's suppose there is a team who is working on one of the microservice application. They can work with Python. Another set of developers in one of the other microservice application, they can work in Java. Another team can work with C++, another can work with Golang, and they can later interact with each other. So that feature is present within microservice based architecture. Okay. So that makes it different from monolithic. Okay. And it makes flexible and it can be scalable as well. Okay. So that's why we are generally in companies, people are mostly focusing, projects are mostly focused towards microservice. Okay. So that it can be scalable. So that is the first and foremost thing people are focusing upon, that is how to make the application much more scalable. Okay. So monolithic is very difficult to adopt with new technologies or languages due to very much tightly coupled. Each and every applications are very tightly coupled. But with microservice, each service can use different set of technologies and database that I have already told you. So monolithic is typically scaled vertically. What's the meaning of that? So there will be only one component, one black box will be there, and within that you can add as many resources as possible. Let's suppose you are adding more CPU, more RAM, you are adding, but it is only one black box. It is only one particular component or one system you can consider. That is called as vertical scaling. But microservices horizontally scaled. So horizontally scaled means there are multiple services and each service are making use of their own resources. So each and every microservice can be independently scaled at a different level based upon what microservice is important for the customer and where the traffic can be huge. Based upon that, we can design like which particular microservice can be scaled and which particular microservice need not to be scaled. So that decision is totally upon us, and that flexibility will be there in our hand. Okay. So that's why each of them has their own advantages and disadvantages. So you should be knowing like when to go for what. Okay. So now let's go on to another set of difference. So now choreography versus orchestration design pattern. So this is coming under Saga design pattern basically. So if you have learned about microservices design pattern, so this will be coming into much more frequent in interview questions. So first they will ask about distributed transaction. If you can able to answer, then they will ask you about Saga design pattern. So if you are able to explain that, then they will they can ask you based upon the previous answers like what is choreography and what's the difference between choreography and orchestration design pattern. So let's understand that. Okay. So choreography design pattern, it involves there is a distributed transaction that we have told you. So each and every set of events is being run basically at each and every stage. So first of all, like let's suppose in Zomato, I am considering like customer is ordering food. So customer will see the food menu first. After seeing the food menu, customer will select like which food they want to order. So after placing the order, there will be one microservice that will place the order. So if that is the event, the event will be generated. Okay, so once that event is triggered and it becomes success, then the next stage will be payment. So once that payment is completed, that is basically another microservice. Okay. So if payment is success and event payment is success, then at third level, there is notification. So notification will be going to delivery boy as well as to customer, to the end user who has ordered that food. That is another microservice, third microservice. Fourth microservice is to handle the delivery boy. So delivery boy will be attached to the particular customer's food ID. Okay, so whatever food ID has been generated or order ID has been generated, based upon that, delivery boy will be assigned to that particular customer. So based upon that delivery boy who has been assigned, so that notification also should be going towards both ends, like towards Zomato also and towards customer also. So that can be another microservice. So if all the events are true, then only the entire set of application will become successful. So there is event driven. So at each and every instant, it will check the events. So at any place, at any point of time, if event is failure, then entire set of past events which has occurred successfully, that will be rolled back. Okay, so that is a very important feature within choreography design pattern, and that makes it different. Okay, so design pattern at each and every stage is important. So wherever you are studying, let's suppose you are learning core Java, so there is also certain set of design patterns. Okay, in Spring Boot also there is certain set of design patterns. Then choreography, it's part of microservice. So microservice is also having certain set of design patterns. So whatever you will study in the entire set of programming world, there is certain set of design patterns you have to go through. Okay, so without any design pattern, you can't implement anything. Whatever you implement, it follows certain design pattern. You should keep this in mind. Okay. So choreography, it involves distributed control. Orchestration, it involves a central coordinator. Okay, so there will be a central point of contact. So that fails, the entire system fails. So that is one disadvantage with orchestration, but it actually helps us. So it involves a central coordinator that directs the flow of the process and it tells all the services what to do. So in choreography, there is a problem. So each and every services will interact with each other, and then there is no one point of contact. Like each and every microservice will interact with each other, and that becomes a little bit haziness at times. Like it looks very clumsy. Like this particular message has come from which microservice, like order microservice or payment microservice or notification microservice. So parallelly, asynchronously, a number of messages will come. So how will that particular message be identified? This message came from which microservice? Okay, so to resolve that problem, basically orchestration design pattern came into picture where there will be one point of contact, like orchestrator or central coordinator will be there who will handle the messages, and those microservices will not interact with each other. Rather, those microservices will send the information to the central orchestrator, and from there, basically, it will send a message from that microservice to another microservice through, like it will be a via call. Okay, so no two microservices will communicate with each other independently. Rather, the microservice, if they want to send any information or convey any information, that should come to the central coordinator first, and after verification of the information, then central coordinator will send that message to the respective microservice where that first microservice has the interest to send that info. So that is the entire flow for orchestration based design pattern. Okay, next set is choreography services act independently. Services within choreography design pattern acts independently and it communicates with each other. So I've already explained you. And orchestration with services acts according to the instruction from the central orchestrator. Okay. Choreography is event-driven approach. Okay. Each service reacts to events and perform tasks autonomously. Okay. I've already explained in the beginning. And orchestration is process driven. The orchestrator controls the process flow. There is no microservice communicating with each other. There is a central orchestrator which actually commands like which microservice has to do what task. So actually that orchestrator will command. So it is process based. Okay, so each orchestrator, there is one orchestrator which controls the entire process flow. It tells each service when to execute and what to execute. Okay, so that is very important. Then choreography is loosely coupled because I've already explained you. So each and every microservice is independent with each other. So services have more autonomy and they don't need to know like what about the internal working of other services. So each and every microservice can work independently. So that makes choreography design pattern or loosely coupled architecture. But orchestration has a central coordinator, central orchestrator in between. Okay. If that particular orchestrator fails, the entire set of microservice work will fail. Okay, so that makes it a tightly coupled architecture. So this is a major disadvantage with orchestration. Rest everything is fine. With choreography, it is common in microservices and event-driven architecture. Okay, where actions are based upon the events. But in orchestration, it's common in process management. Okay, so whatever processes are being acquired across entire services, that is common. Orchestration is common. Okay, and this is common in business process and workflows where a central controller coordinator is required. So in that case, orchestration design pattern is important. Okay, I hope you got a clarity on this. So it's a homework for you to understand like what is the use cases for these two type of design patterns. That's the homework for you, and comment it down below if you have find out like what are the use cases for these two. Now let's understand the next. So what's the difference between service registry and service discovery? So this is also very much important. Okay. So service registry means you are registering all the microservice. So for discovery of services, you need to register your microservices before, because without registering, how will you identify that a particular service is present or not? So service discovery actually at runtime, it checks like what all microservices are present. So if that service is not registered, so service discovery will not be able to discover that microservice. Okay, so at runtime, it will not be able to handle the data, whatever is coming from the UI. So service registry, it is a central location where services register themselves when they are available, and it deregisters when they are unavailable. Okay, that is very important. So whenever a service is coming, it will register. If it is not there, it become unavailable. Okay, for service discovery, it is the process by which the clients or other services find the registered services. So first that service needs to be registered, then service discovery will find those registered services. That's the main concept. With respect to service registry, there are various examples of service registry which helps to register those services, and those are Eureka, Zookeeper. So basically here what is happening is like a properties file where you are configuring all the services data. So what all microservices you will be making use of, those data you can save it over here in the properties. Okay, so it will be like a vault where you can store all the microservices data. You can configure your URLs, you can configure your username data, you can configure all the necessary information which will be helpful in sending the data across multiple services, and you can register those services, microservices. Okay, for service discovery, examples includes tools or patterns that perform service discovery. Okay, like Netflix, Eureka is their consoles DNS resolution. So these are certain tools with the help of which you will discover the microservices. Then service registry typically used in microservice architecture basically to enable one microservice to another microservice inter-service communication. Okay, so wherever inter-service communication is required, then service registry will be helpful over there. Service discovery, it ensures dynamic discovery. So at runtime, dynamically, if you want to discover the services, okay, so for there, without making use of any hard-coded URLs, which makes it easier to scale the microservice dynamically. And that point of time, service discovery is important. Okay, service registry maintains an up-to-date list of all the updated services. Whatever services are there, it will maintain all the data, up-to-date data. Okay, and their metadata such as IP address, ports, and health status, those data will be maintained over there. Okay, with service discovery, it provides a logic and tools for the clients to search for services. Okay, so there will be a lot of logics will be written, a lot of if conditions will be written. There will be a lot of tools for clients with the help of which they can search for those services which the client needs. Okay, and retrieve the data for communication purpose. Okay, so service registry often integrates with tools like API gateway. Okay, service registry actually interacts with the API gateway. For example, Joule or Spring Cloud Gateway. This is an API gateway for security purpose, which actually routes the request to the respective microservices where that has been called. Okay, but in service discovery, it often integrated with the service clients to allow them to discover the available services at runtime. Okay, so at runtime, whatever services are available, it will help that services clients to find them. Okay, so with the help of integration service, it allows the clients to discover that services which are available at runtime. So this is the basic difference between service registry and service discovery. I hope you got a clarity on this. Okay, now the next thing is synchronous versus asynchronous communication. This is also one of the important interview questions. Okay, so they can ask you like how can two microservices communicate with each other? Okay, so there can be two ways, right? It can be synchronous way of communication, it can be asynchronous way of communication. So what's the difference between the two? That is very important. With respect to synchronous, basically the clients basically waits for the response. So it's synchronous, right? So one by one data will go and will get a response. So whenever the person or user is sending the request, then that user has to wait, like when that particular API which has called that service will send a response back. So it will wait for that particular microservice to send a response. Okay, there is no other way around. But in asynchronous communication, the client sends a request, but the client will not wait to get the response immediately. Okay, the client can do any other task and they knows that parallelly that particular task is going on. So client can do other set of request calling. Okay, so other set of calls can happen parallelly. So client need not be required to wait over there. So that it becomes very much time effective and it increases the productivity of the entire application. Okay, then synchronous communication is commonly implemented via REST API or SOAP services. So REST API or SOAP services are required to implement the synchronous communication. Okay, and with asynchronous communication, it has been implemented. The normal REST template will not be helpful for synchronous communication. There, we have to make use of Kafka or RabbitMQ. So there is a separate set of concept like how Kafka is working, how data is stored within the message broker. There are a lot of things are there, topics are there, broker is there. So if you want to me to create a specific video on Kafka, do let me know in the comment box. I will create a separate video on that. Next is synchronous communication requires a real-time communication between two services, but in asynchronous, it occurs at different time. Communication occurs at a very different time. So if you think that communication will happen at this particular moment, it will not happen. You never know like which microservice will be completed at which particular time interval. You never know that because all services are being called asynchronously. So that makes it a difference. With respect to blocking perspective, the client is blocked until the response is received in synchronous. For asynchronous, it's non-blocking. The client can continue process other tasks and they will wait for that particular microservice response. So parallelly, they can do multiple tasks as well. So that makes it different. Okay. So for synchronous, it is suitable for short tasks, for smaller tasks that requires immediate feedback, requires immediate response. For that, let's suppose you want to query database and you want to get the response from database. Okay. So in that scenario, synchronous communication will be helpful. And asynchronous is basically for long running tasks, for long running processes. Like let's suppose you are running a batch and like it's like a day end batch job or a morning batch job. So that will take some time to process entire set of jobs that has been assigned. So for that, it will take a lot of time. Let's suppose email notification is there. So email notification is not being notified to just one customer. The one particular product can have lakhs of customers. So email notification needs to be sent to lakhs of customers. So it cannot be synchronous at all. So it will take a lot of time if you are doing communication via synchronous process. So there, asynchronous communication is required to send the email across 1 lakh plus customer base. So there asynchronous communication is helpful where there is long running process. Okay. So I hope you have got to know the basic understanding between synchronous versus asynchronous process of communication. Please prepare on these differences. These differences are very much important. Okay. Specifically for experience. For freshers, they may ask, but for experience, they will definitely ask. Okay, because I'm telling like this because for freshers they will mostly focus upon core Java and Spring Boot. Okay, they rarely go to microservice, but if you are having more than 2 years of experience, then they will definitely go towards microservice. So prepare well for that. Okay, so this was the difference between them. So now let's understand the difference between Spring Cloud versus Spring Boot. Okay, so there is Spring Cloud, okay, where we are just deploying our services, and there is Spring Boot with the help of which we do the rapid application development of our project. Okay, so Spring Boot focuses on creating standalone Spring application with embedded server. There is Tomcat embedded server, and with the help of which it creates a standalone based Spring application. For Spring Cloud, it focuses on solving the complex distributed system of the microservice. Okay. So for Spring Boot, it provides the tools to quickly create a Spring application. There is rapid application development feature is there within Spring Boot, right? So what does that do? There is auto configuration and rapid application development where it will give you production ready feature of the application within quick time. Okay, so that makes Spring Boot different from Spring or another type of frameworks basically. Okay, and Spring Cloud, it adds tools for managing service discovery. So Spring Boot feature will be there within Spring Cloud, but it adds extra tools within it, like for managing the discovery, service discovery, to configuration management and fault tolerance, like to have circuit breaker, Netflix, Hystrix process, those all things will be present within the Spring Cloud. So those things also should be kept in mind. Next is Spring Boot contains embedded containers like embedded servers like Tomcat or Jetty. Okay, so basically Tomcat will be there within Spring Boot. So if you want to remove Tomcat and if you want to make use of Jetty, you can put Tomcat under exclusion tag and then you can include Jetty. So that also questions can be asked in interview, like how can I exclude one of the server and how can I include another servers. So there you can make use of this, you can answer it like this. Okay, so in Spring Cloud it does not deal with actual application runtime, but it provides support for microservices infrastructure. Okay, so these kind of applications are not being dealt with within Spring Cloud in actual application runtime, but it provides microservice based infrastructure support. I hope you got a clarity on this. Okay, Spring Boot auto configuration feature, I already told you. In Spring Cloud, it works with Spring Boot to enhance the microservice based project. Okay, so it actually helps. So Spring Boot feature will be there within Spring Cloud. Along with that, there is some extra set of functionalities available. Okay, for Spring Boot, it is ideal for creating monolithic or simple Spring applications. Okay, so with Spring Cloud, it is best for building distributed systems like service discovery or API gateway or circuit breaker design pattern. If those are all things you want to implement, then you can go ahead with Spring Cloud. So whenever you will implement service discovery or API gateway or circuit breaker design pattern, you will get to know like you are making use of Spring Cloud library. So if you are doing that, do let me know in the comment box like you are importing the library of Spring Cloud or not. I will wait for your comments. Okay. So let's understand this. Service discovery versus API gateway. This is also one of the important questions. So this has not been asked much, but this is important. Okay, you can learn that. Individually, the question can be asked like what is API gateway? What is Joule? Okay, what is service discovery specifically for Eureka? So they can be independently asked and they may ask the difference as well. Okay, so what's the difference between the two? So service discovery is a tool that helps discover and register the microservice in a distributed architecture system. Okay, and API gateway, it acts as a single entry point for clients to access various microservices. So whatever Postman is sending the data or UI is sending the data, directly it will not go to your endpoint controller. Okay, so first it will go to API gateway. After that, it will route that request to the corresponding endpoint. So this is the functionality of API gateway. So their Joule is helpful for them. Okay, so they can ask you like which API gateway have you worked upon? So there you have to answer this. Okay, then provides service discovery actually provides dynamic service registration and health checks to monitor health checks for microservice. Service discovery helps us in that. In API gateway, it routes the request to appropriate microservice. That I already told you. Service discovery clients can directly communicate with microservice via Eureka service registry. So with the help of Eureka, you can register the microservices and then clients can directly communicate with the end microservice, end user microservice. Okay. So for that, that service should be registered within service registry. Then only they can communicate with another microservice, right? So for communication, it's very important to register that microservice. Then API gateway, the clients interacts only with API gateway, which handles the routing to backend services. Okay. So those API gateways are important in REST APIs, which handles the routing services. Without routing, how the API gateway will know like which microservice will be routed? There is some request coming, right? That request should go to one of the microservice. So how it will understand like which microservice it will go to? Okay, so that for that API gateway is important. So that's why client interacts only with the API gateway. Okay, then service discovery works with Spring Cloud. It actually works with Spring Cloud for service discovery in microservice environments. Okay, so basically it does what? So service discovery, it actually works in close interaction with Spring Cloud. Okay, so, and without the service Spring Cloud library, you can't make use of service discovery. Okay, so when you implement it, you will get to know. So it's helpful when it works with Spring Cloud and it for service discovery and microservice environments. And API gateway, it provides feature like rate limiting. What is rate limiter? This is also important interview question. Client interviews, they can ask, what is a rate limiter? So rate limiting means there can be n number of calls from UI, right? Like thousands of calls, lakhs of calls are coming at the same time. Let's suppose during big billion day, lakhs of customers are trying to access to the same product, iPhone 17 or iPhone 16, anything. So there you have to limit the number of requests coming from the UI. So their rate limiter will be very much helpful. With the help of rate limiter, if you can set it like at one instance in one particular second, only 20 requests should come, so that you can set it. Okay, so basically API gateway can provide feature like rate limiter, feature authentication feature, load balancing feature. So these all features are coming within API gateway. So a lot of features are coming, right? So API gateway is very important. And that Joule is one of the example with the help of which you can implement rate limiter, you can implement authentication, and you can implement load balancing feature. So if you want to me to create a specific video like how we can implement API gateway, do comment it out. I will create a specific video on that. Okay. With service discovery, it enables scalability. Whenever you want to scale your microservice, then service discovery is helpful. It reduces the need for hard-coded URLs. You don't have to put hard-coded URL. It will just register the services and automatically it will scale your microservice as and when required. You just have to add the functionality over there. Okay. For API gateway, it simplifies the client-side logic basically, and it routes all the requests to one single URL. Only one single URL will be required. Through that, it will route the logic. Whatever request is coming, it will route to a particular endpoint through one URL. So that is the major difference between API gateway and service registry. Okay, I hope you got the clarity on this. So now let's understand some of the design patterns. So there are two design patterns mainly. It's like circuit breaker design pattern and fallback mechanism. It is one of the mechanism. So let's suppose one microservice is there, like microservice A is calling microservice B is calling microservice C. And whenever microservice B is expecting response from microservice C, at that instance, microservice C fails. Microservice C is not responding at all. It failed over there. So there needs to be certain process to give certain response back. Otherwise, the entire loop will be over and the entire set of microservice will not be able to work properly. So in that scenario, fallback mechanism needs to be implemented when the main service or when the circuit breaker is triggered. So circuit breaker is a form of what? It's a form of design pattern which internally implements the fallback mechanism. Okay. So let's understand circuit breaker first. So circuit breaker is a pattern that prevents a service from repeatedly attempting an operation which is very much likely to fail. So let's suppose B is calling C and you know that C microservice is not fully developed. Okay, so there's a high chance, 90% chance that C microservice will give you 500 response or 404 response. You are knowing about that, but still you are calling that microservice. That means there's a higher chance that those microservice response will fail. So it will basically it limits the reattempts. So you can set the reattempts in the configuration class, okay, or in the application.yaml file. There you can provide the reattempts, like how many times you want to reattempt. If you can set it to 3 or 4, it will do reattempts that many times, and if it doesn't return any response, then it will give the default message like that particular microservice is down or any other kind of message you want to provide. So internally, fallback mechanism is calling circuit breaker. When circuit breaker is triggered, then fallback mechanism is being used over there. I hope you got the interlinked dependency between fallback and circuit breaker design pattern. Okay. So circuit breaker is used when a service fails repeatedly. So it enters a closed state and it rejects requests to avoid further issues. That I think you are getting it. And fallback, it provides a default response when the main service is unavailable or fails. So I hope this also you are clear with it. Circuit breaker helps prevent cascading failures. Okay, so there can be a chance like there is n number of microservices being called internally, and let's suppose E microservice is returning error response to D, and D microservice is solely dependent upon E microservice, so D will also fail. So if D is having dependency, C is dependent on D microservice, so C will also fail. So there is a cascading failures that may occur, right? If you are not able to handle those services called properly. So circuit breaker, if you are implementing, it will make sure that it will prevent the cascading failures of all those microservice calls. In fallback, it is used. It can be used to gracefully degrade the functionality during a service outage. So whenever there is failure, it will reduce the number of functionalities that you have implemented. So because of which there will be not much microservice calls, and then there will be fallback mechanism. Okay, so all the services will be fallback and it will degrade the functionalities. I hope you got the clarity on this. So with circuit breaker, it is commonly implemented using tools like Hystrix or Resilience 4J. So these are some of the tools with the help of which you can implement circuit breaker design pattern. Okay. So how to implement that? If you comment it down, I will create a separate video on this. For fallback, typically it is used in conjunction, means in mix with circuit breaker. That I already told you. Fallback and circuit breaker are internally dependent on each other to handle failures much more effectively. Okay. Circuit breaker, it protects the system from overloading. Okay, so there can be n number of failures, like cascading failures may occur. So basically, circuit breaker, it protects the entire application system. And fallback, it ensures that the application does not break entirely and offers a degraded experience. So it's like best experience customer is getting, but one of the microservices not responding or it's failing, so it will degrade the experience a bit, but it will give the response. It will not like entire application is shuts down. No, it will not happen. It will give the response, but with a degraded performance, little bit degraded performance. But important is what? Important is to get the response that it will give. So that is the entire process, how fallback mechanism and circuit breaker are linked with each other and some difference between the two. I hope you got the clarity on this. Okay. So yes, this was it for this video. I hope you got the clarity. Like this versus that. I know this video was very long a bit. So it's like one time investment you have to do, and you have to revise it, these concepts which I have shown you on the screen. If you revise it on a daily basis, it will hardly take 15-20 minutes. If you revise it, then believe me, 30 to 40% of the question you can very easily answer, because in core Java, Spring Boot, microservices, each part, each section has some question, 1 to 2 question on this versus that based question. So this has to be very much clear in your mind. At least 4 to 5 pointers should be there in your mind, so that you can answer 2 to 3 of them. Okay, so this was it for this video. I will see you in the next video with next set of concepts. If you want to know some other kind of topics, do let me know in the chat box, like which type of topics you are interested to learn more from me. I will create a separate video on that. So till then, we'll be waiting for your response, and we'll create a separate video on those type of content. So till then, it's Devjit Roy signing off. Bye bye.